Firewatch is a game that takes place in Shoshone National Park in 1989, and is all about a fire lookout by the name of Henry, which for those who don't know, a fire lookout is an individual who spends months at a time in remote locations scouting for potential fires, alone, away from any major cities or civilizations, with Henry only encountering 5 people outside of his colleague Delilah for the entirety of his 79 days in the park. Now, whilst the majority of this game does take place in the national park, it actually opens with a story set in Boulder, Colorado 1975, where we and Henry meet a college professor by the name of Julia, who we later become a couple with. And through the years leading up to 1989, we explore this romance and all of its trials and tribulations, with the game giving us the option to make seemingly minor choices in the way of affecting said relationship. Choices that at the time may not seem to have much or any of an impact on Henry and Julia's relationship, seeing as though no matter what choice we make, whether good or bad, we ultimately end up at the same tragic outcome, with Julia's dementia rapidly taking over, and Henry making the selfish decision to run away from dealing with it, ultimately asking the dramatic question, is it possible to outrun and escape one's most daunting problems, when the fear of facing them head on becomes too overwhelming? Once you arrive in Shoshone National Park, and at the tower you spend the next 79 days living in, you're greeted on a radio by somebody named Delilah, another fire lookout who lives in a tower just over the cliff from you, one that can't be accessed up until the end of the game. Anyway, on your first call with Delilah, she asks you some really personal questions regarding why you took the job, which at the time can seem a little weird. However, we find out several days later that Delilah was actually drunk during this call, our first major hint to the answer of this game's dramatic question. Delilah gives you several different tasks to do during your stay at the national park, ranging from picking up supply drops to dealing with illegal fireworks. However, as time goes on, you discover something unusual is happening on the mountain, and on day 1, when hiking back from your encounter with the 2 teenagers, you spot a strange, silhouetted man watching you from afar, one who once upon arriving back at your tower, you find out has broken in for reasons unknown. On day 2, you're tasked with investigating a cut-off phone line Delilah believes to have been destroyed by last night's storm. However, upon arriving at said phone line, you learn that actually it wasn't destroyed by a storm, but rather cut, deliberately. So naturally you and Delilah assume that this was the doing of the 2 teenagers Henry interrogated at the lake a day prior, and on your hunt for the 2 you come across a backpack dangling from atop a tree, a backpack with the name Brian Goodwin attached to its front. Upon reporting this back to Delilah, she immediately recognises the name, and explains to Henry that Brian was the son of a man by the name of Ned Goodwin, a former fire lookout who was stationed in Henry's tower over 3 summers ago. And curious, Henry asked Delilah why the 2 left, to which Delilah doesn't really have a definitive answer to, but assumes that the wilderness wasn't really for Brian, therefore his father must have done the right thing and taken him home, something a little later on we'll learn to sadly be untrue. On day 15 we're woken up in the middle of the night to what Henry calls a Jules dream, ironically described in his journal as everything but a dream, rather a nightmare, with Henry spending time on the beach with Jules in Melbourne, and then the 2 ever so slowly drowning. However, this time Henry seemingly wakes up before this nightmare ever takes place, having an imagined moment of intimacy with Julia before going back to sleep, a moment which many may claim his growing connection with Delilah to have caused this more pleasant dream. Either way, something seems to be improving in Henry, but whether or not you equate that to the distance he's put between himself and Julia, or the presence of another individual similar to his wife, is up for interpretation, but nevertheless another hint to the answer of this game's dramatic question. Over 2 weeks later, Delilah confesses to Henry that he had called her during the night of the dream, however didn't want to interrupt as she thought it were a pleasant moment for Henry, and 33 days into the game, we're given Henry's first acknowledgement of the potential mistake he's made, regarding running away to the forest, and away from Julia, and in an attempt to comfort Henry, Delilah decides to tell him her reason as to why she joined the Firewatch.
Look, so a couple of months before I took this job, I was with this guy, Javier. He's incredible, caring, sexy as hell. He was a driller down in Casper. We dated for almost 5 years. I was working with the Wyoming Outdoor Leadership School, and I was obsessed with it. I wanted to be an instructor so badly. And I was sure I was going to marry Javier as soon as I could be bothered. Walls was also a good excuse to get out of town, drink whiskey in the mountains, cut loose. Then, Javier's brother got killed working in Gillette, and for some reason, I didn't come home. Javier said it was fine. He'd go to the funeral, take care of his mom, stuff like that. It'd be easier solo. When he came back, he left me. I came out here, I lied, and told my sister he fucked our neighbor. I've just lied about it for over 10 years. And, for some reason, I wanted you to know.
Yet another example of a soul so haunted by the problems that await them back home, they decide to instead run away from them, rather than face them. And because of how upset Delilah sounds when telling this story, heavily implies that despite her being so far away from it for at least 10 years now, she's still majorly affected by the tragic events that took place back home. On day 76, Delilah tasks Henry with scouting for bear tracks. However, plans are abandoned once Henry gets down to the lake, as he finds a clipboard with Delilah and Henry's conversations written down on it. Somebody's been watching them. Henry scouts the area for clues, only to find a radio very similar to his own laying on the ground, and just as he picks it up, he's knocked unconscious by a figure from behind. After waking up, the radio and clipboard are gone, and Henry doesn't seem to remember much besides the words Wapiti Station written down. Intrigued and enraged, Henry attempts to break into the station, however can't due to a lack of equipment, so makes his way over to a nearby firefighter camp in search of an axe. And on the way, Delilah re-brings up the Goodwins, stressing about how Brian might have reacted if he were in a similar situation to Henry, a perfect resurgence to a set of characters who are about to become very prominent in and with this story's ending. After stealing a wave receiver from Wapiti Station, Henry follows it to a strange backpack strapped to a tree, and strapped to said backpack, a key, one which unlocks the door to a cave you pass through multiple times in the game. And upon entering the cave, somebody shuts the door behind him, so Henry has to find a new way out, and eventually stumbles across an outcropping which Brian Goodwin once used as a fort. Heading back into the cave, Henry stumbles across one of the most gut-wrenching moments in gaming history, the realisation that Brian Goodwin never made it home, but rather died horrifically in this cave.
Ah, shit. Are you... Oh, God. You're Brian Goodwin. You fell.
A day later, the wave receiver goes off once more, and tracking it, Henry comes across another audio tape strapped to a rock, this time with his name labelled above it.
Yeah, hi, Henry. Hey, you better find this before it burns up. We've been causing each other a lot of headaches. Now I gotta go stake out a site that's as fit for living as the one you're about to find. You'll get it when you see it. You can't blame me for keeping an eye on you. Not after bumping into you back in May. Down by the cave, for fuck's sake. I've been up here for 3 years. I kept it cozy. Winters are harsh as hell, and I ran out of books. But I got that antenna rigged up, and Delilah, she's a record you don't gotta flip. I kinda get why Brian took to her. About a week ago, I stopped worrying about you finding anything out, and that's right when everything went shithouse with you two. You guys don't know anything about having kids. All right, nobody knows nothing. It ain't Andy and Opie walking down the lake to fish every afternoon. It ain't Mayberry. But you gotta know I didn't kill him. All right, we were climbing. I was teaching him. Brian was uneducated in the way to do anything. He just fucking didn't sink his anchor the right way. You know, I thought about going back, having to answer questions, and having to get him put in the ground, and I didn't see the point. Don't come looking for me. I'm sorry about your wife.
Yet another example of a tragic soul so terrified of the doom that awaits them back home. They decided to simply run from their problems and take what Delilah calls the coward's way out. Henry then reports Ned's hideout. However, at this point Delilah doesn't really care much, and in a moment of anger, she spews a line which I like to interpret as the answer to the game's dramatic question, and all Sean Vanneman and Jake Rodkin were setting out to tell us.
He obviously didn't want to forget him. He just didn't know what to do.
Henry, not knowing what to do isn't okay. When you're supposed to look after someone,
You figure it out.
Upon arriving at Delilah's tower, you soon learn that she hasn't in fact waited for you, and the voice that you've been getting so close to all this time is gone. And this moment really seemed to frustrate or even upset a lot of players, as although the game has been building up this massive mystery, which it turned out not to be, at least we're going to get to see the person we've been connecting with this whole time. However, this isn't what Firewatch is about. It isn't a romantic mystery story, nor is it some major government conspiracy. It's simply a story about grief and isolation, and the avenues one can take when dealing with said emotions. Hence why I haven't brought up any of the mysterious happenings which take place on the mountain, such as a government research site, or teenage girls that go missing, simply because it doesn't matter. Ultimately it isn't what the story is about, but rather just intriguing mysteries implemented in a way to keep the player engaged. Firewatch is simply just a story set out to answer a dramatic question, and upon completion of the game, answers that question. Anyway, I just want to thank you all so much for watching. Please make sure to like, subscribe and turn on post notifications if you stayed to the end, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace!